And particularly what we focus on is the links between those areas of connectivity, and particularly around how do you identify, map, and document these areas, as well as how do you report on these through a set of indicators. However, we're not going to hear about this tonight. That was just my small plug for UNEP WCMC. What we're going to hear about tonight is a set of presentations, particularly around bringing together different agendas, which we've heard a lot about in the course of the last over a week's discussions around synergies. And we've also got a series of quite exciting case studies of connectivity as well. And so if you've got questions, there'll be an opportunity to ask questions, and there will also be an opportunity, even if you're not on the agenda, to tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing in country as well. So I'd like to start off with, we've got two representatives of two different conventions here, so some synergies between the Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species and UNCCD. So I'd like to start with Amy Frankel to give us some opening remarks. She's online and couldn't be with us in person. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Convention or CMS, Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, Amy is the Executive Secretary there. So it's been very good that we've been able to secure her time. So over to you, Amy. Excellent. We can see you, Amy, so if you'd like to speak, please do. Hang on, we have no sound. You can hear us and we can't hear you. Can we get some technical support, please? Back to me. Can you try again, Amy, please?
Hello? Testing?
Okay, we still don't have any sound. I'm so sorry about this. Okay.
Okay, let's try again. Can you hear them? Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much, Amy. Over to you.
I'm definitely not a tech expert, but I'm getting there. All right, wonderful. Let me start again. So glad you can hear me. I am really pleased to be able to speak, and sorry I couldn't be there in person, but you see UN Bonn behind me, so I'm speaking from Bonn, Germany, where both UNCCD and CMS are headquartered. And let me just give some brief sort of scene setting in terms of connectivity and what we mean by it. First, you know, the timing of this event is really spot on, because this is a topic that's getting more and more traction and recognition in terms of its importance for healthy ecosystems. Now, the role of connectivity in addressing biodiversity loss was recognized already, at least in 2010, if not earlier, because it was included in the Aichi Global Biodiversity Targets. Yet its implementation has unfortunately been largely ignored. This point was underscored by the IPBES Global Assessment on Biodiversity that they issued in 2019. Now, for the Convention on Migratory Species, connectivity is absolutely essential. First, migratory species rely on a network of specific types of sites and habitats as part of their annual movements. But second, migratory species must be able to move unhindered in order to reach those sites, which can be located across national boundaries and continents. So for CMS, it's absolutely essential. But connectivity is not only relevant to species. In fact, the recently launched Second Global Land Outlook drew attention to the key role of ecological connectivity in effectively ensuring long-term positive benefits for the interventions done for restoration of degraded lands and ecosystems. Connectivity is also a powerful planning tool to assist governments in their national plans so as to be able to map out which areas are priorities for conservation and those which are most suitable for a variety of economic activities. The definition that was adopted by our CMS Conference of the Parties in 2020 goes beyond just species, and it defines connectivity as the unimpeded movement of species and the flow of natural processes that sustain life on Earth. So this is just a quick background on, why is it relevant? What is it? You'll hear a lot from experts in the discussion about what do we mean by connectivity. Let me just add for a minute to give you more context, a few of the ways in which connectivity has been gaining traction and been recognized in many recent international processes as well as national conservation efforts. So to name just a few, first in April 2021, the UN General Assembly adopted Resolution 75271.
Recording in progress.
Which is entitled Nature Knows No Borders, Transboundary Cooperation, a Key Factor for Biodiversity Conservation, Restoration, and Sustainable Use. And it specifically calls for governments, all member states, to address the issues of connectivity as part of this resolution. Next, the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. While negotiations of the GBF are still ongoing, connectivity is included in many of the draft goals and targets, including the target on 30 by 30, but also the target on ecosystem restoration, on spatial planning, and on urban planning. So it's quite, it was really the most, I would say, most spoken word in the most recent meetings in Geneva. Next, the GEF-8. GEF-8 programming, which was just agreed to recently or finalized, gives a strong emphasis to connectivity, including both in the conservation programs, such as the Global Wildlife Program, as well as in landscape and threat type programs, such as the Infrastructure Program, which focuses on road and rail infrastructure. 6 out of the 11 integrated programs of the GEF-8, and 3 of the 5 focal areas include provisions for restoring, maintaining, and promoting connectivity. Finally, actually 2 more. The second to last is UNEA. UNEA just had its 5th or 5.2 meeting, and in a political declaration, it was again endorsed the need to promote ecological connectivity. There's also a resolution on infrastructure, which I think we'll be hearing more about tonight. Finally, IPBES. So in July 2018, the secretariats of CMS, the World Heritage Convention, and the UNCCD all submitted proposals to IPBES to undertake an assessment on connectivity. Now in 2019, the IPBES 7 plenary agreed to postpone consideration of this and to bring that to the 9th session, which is taking place here in Bonn in early July. It's very important that those who see this as a priority pay attention to this, because it's of vital importance, connectivity for national level actions to implement CMS, UNCCD, the Decade on Restoration, and the post-2020 GBF. So I am hopeful that the IPBES plenary will issue a decision calling for IPBES to carry out this assessment and to not delay this work further. So I'm going to close by thanking the UNCCD Executive Secretary, Ibrahim Chow, for his friendship and collaboration. And I look forward to working together with all of you to do our very best to help our natural world. And I really look forward to listening to the coming talks, and thanks to the organizers. And Claire, and over to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Amy, for those words of inspiration. We did hear you in the end, which is great. I'm just looking around. I think what we might do now is I might pass to Baron Orr, who's the lead scientist at UNCCD, to explain a little bit about why UNCCD is interested in connectivity. Why are you interested in connectivity?
So before I begin, there's a very large echo, and maybe the sound people can correct the echo. Merci. So thank you, Wendy, and thank you very much, Amy, for those excellent remarks. That's going to set the stage quite well for what I would like to say. So my name is Baron Orr, and I'm the lead scientist for the UNCCD. And particularly in the biodiversity community, the question, why would UNCCD be interested in connectivity, is raised all the time. But you have to recognize that there has been a complete paradigm shift in the way we approach land degradation in the convention, also in the SDG process, the Agenda 2030 process. In the old days, which is the last 4 decades, we addressed land degradation where we saw it, we fixed it. And where we didn't see it, we tried to prevent it, usually through the biodiversity conventions, through protection. And we failed miserably in keeping up with the problem. And so in 2012, at Rio Plus 20, the executive secretary at the time, Luc Nyakaja, brought to the table the idea of, at a national to global level, pursuing a no net loss approach to land degradation. And that changed everything. And you might say, why? You still have to do the same things on the ground. But the reality is that if you say, as this convention has said, that you're not going to do any further harm in net terms, in any ecosystem type, in any land type, then from today, and today was 2015, and we're going to maintain that all the way to 2030, or at least we're going to achieve that by 2030, then it changes everything that you're doing, right? Because your project might not be in the right place. It might not be the optimal place for your biodiversity corridor or your climate change mitigation plantation or your farms or whatever it might be. You see, we're talking, from IPBES and IPCC, we're talking about 70% or more of the ice-free terrestrial ecosystems having been transformed from their natural state for human use. And if you go with the least aggressive figure, which is the one submitted by governments to this convention, 1 in 5 of those hectares is no longer productive. Now, if you have a food gap of between 56 and 70% by 2050, if you know what it will actually take to mitigate climate change and the role that land will play, if you consider water quality, if you consider nature and biodiversity, these are all demands for land, and they're all competing. And so you could say, well, the first thing that we would do is stop land conversion. That's going to be challenging. It's happening every day. And the second thing that we could do is we could restore land. But again, where? What's the optimal? We don't have resources to restore it all. But if we took a no net loss approach, then we're forced to get into the planning space, which we're not in, except in a tiny percentage of our investment. We're in what we do on the ground space, but we're not where the land use decisions are being made. And rarely anywhere in the world are municipal planners, conservation planners, and ag planners in the same room at the same time. Rarely are the policies aligned at the national level to even encourage that. So it's all siloed. If you actually look at the models, many conservation optimization models have growth as a variable. And many municipal development models for economic development have the environment as a single variable, land cover. They don't look at it in any depth. But if we put those two things together, we would have everything, wouldn't we? We would actually be able to optimize. I'll put it another way. A study a few years ago, and I apologize to the authors because I can't remember the name, looked at all the protected areas in the world, assessed the biodiversity on the inside and the biodiversity immediately outside. And guess where it was higher? Outside. Does that mean that they placed the protected area boundaries in the wrong place? Maybe, but think about it. At that time, you protected everything that you could. It was opportunistic. We don't have opportunistic options anymore. Those are long gone. So today, when we're talking about biodiversity corridors, we should be talking about exactly where. Where would we protect the absolute most biodiversity? And then sit down at the table and say that to those that are looking for other land uses, so that we can then mix these and put them in the right places. And we should be investing a lot more in restoring that 20 to 40% of land that's been degraded, some of which we could bring back into production, for example, if it was for agriculture, some of which we might try agrivoltaics, where we would place the high-level, well-distributed solar panels and grow crops underneath, or what have you. But we would be a big part of that optimization approach. But we're not doing this. We're not talking about this. Yes, it's now, integrated land use planning is the term from the Millennium Development Goals, right? So it's an old term, but it encompasses territorial planning, spatial planning, all of these. And it's now a target, or it could be, if it survives in the development of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but it doesn't mean that we're doing it yet. But because UNFCCC also has a planning focus, CBD and the UNCCD, maybe we're getting somewhere. Maybe we're pushing this agenda forward. And then to take this another step, go open up the guidance from the Society for Ecological Restoration and its incredible guidance for restoration, and show me where connectivity is. Are we actually designing our restoration to connect? And are we doing the opposite? Are we connecting, as I just was arguing, to restore? We have a great example in the working paper Amy mentioned that's in the Great Green Wall. And somebody said to me, oh, you must be focused on the few protected areas in the Great Green Wall. Do you think the migratory species are landing only in those few protected areas? They're landing everywhere. Biodiversity is everywhere. The biggest effort of the World Agroforestry Center in the Sahel is not planting trees, it's growing trees, grasses, everything. It's about energizing the ecosystem to recover. Of course, there's planting as well, but it's another optimization thing. It's assessment of the potential and doing the right thing. As we say in this convention, doing the right things in the right places at the right scale, and then this will be the last part that I talk about, with all the right people. Now, what do I mean by that? Too often when we get excited about protecting nature, we forget about the people that are actually there. But we have 608 million farming families all over the world that could actually be working with us if the policies were aligned that way, if the incentives, if we treated them as business people that need the startup cost to do the things that we would like them to do to promote biodiversity, to bring carbon out of the atmosphere into the soils where it belongs, we would have to incentivize that. Are our incentives anywhere in the world incentivizing those small farmers? I would argue very few places. Then the last comment I'll make in that regard is those that may be in the room that are very focused on land rights and safeguarding land tenure, most of that community had the belief that good land stewardship and safeguarded land tenure are correlated. But they're not, if you look at the science. Why not? Anybody tell me? Why are they not correlated? They're not correlated because of the enabling environment, or as you might say in the biodiversity community, enabling conditions. If the policies are not aligned if the financial access is not there, if the institutions are not in place, if you don't have a national science policy interface informing the process, any one of those can result in unintended outcomes. And when the safeguarded land tenure is granted, it makes more sense to sell the land to protect the future of my children than it does to pursue sustainable practices. But if we were to get it together, as the GEF is asking countries to do, policy alignment is a major emphasis in the GEF 8, where they looked at economic, social, environmental, et cetera, policies and actually removed the negative incentives and put in the right incentives, then people would stay on the land. Any survey in the world where people are on the land, they want to stay on the land. They want their children to be able to continue. That they leave it if they can't make it and they can't guarantee the future of their children. What are we going to do if we lose all those land stewards? Do you think we're going to be able to do it alone? Absolutely not. We need these communities to be combined. And that's why CMS and UNCCD are working so hard to pursue ecological connectivity. Thank you very much.
Great, and thank you very much for your passion, Baron, on connectivity. Now, Baron is going to have to run off and join a contact group, but before he runs off, I'm just wondering if there's any questions anyone has in the audience or any thoughts they might like to ask him before he leaves us. No? Okay, if you...
As my grandmother used to say, be brave. Ask me a question.
Yes, thank you very much, Baron. In as much as we appreciate the strategy, the desire for us to be connected, I just have a feeling that somewhere, if we don't carry it on very well, we might lose it. In my culture, there's a saying that over-dependence on other people, you end up losing the direction. So in terms of the UNCCD, I just wanted to find out what, I don't know whether strategies or pillars have you put in place to ensure that we don't lose it in the brackets of thinking about the other three conventions, the Rio conventions, and we are able to achieve sustainable land management.
It's a great question. Oh, little echo there. You know, relative to the climate change convention, we're a coffee break, right? We're tiny. Relative to the biodiversity convention, maybe a week of dinner out, right? We're small. So we don't do anything alone. We leverage everything that's out there. Everything, you can't pursue an LDN project and get funding unless you're delivering multiple benefits. And then everything that we do in what we put to the attention of parties, as I mentioned before, is about addressing bottlenecks. What are the things that if we could give a little more guidance or push investment in the right direction or get the attention of the right bodies, what are those things that would then get us closer to achieving land degradation neutrality? And I agree with you. It's a steep hill to climb, but it's a steep hill to climb no matter what we do. I mean, we've got, these are multiple train wrecks heading to the same station at top speed, right? The food gap, as I mentioned, the climate crisis, et cetera. There's no second guessing this. I have two daughters. One is 3 and one is 7. And I'm terrified for their future. And I know many of you feel the same way for your own children. So what I'm saying is, the way I look at it, we get our heads together, we take the common approach, whatever it is, right? I mean, if you look at the way Amy guided many different organizations to that definition that she read to you, that definition, which is perfect for the UNCCD. It says all life on Earth. It includes people. It says processes. It includes land, right? It includes everything that we need. That's a perfect starting point. And if we don't lose a lot of time fighting over this indicator for that indicator, but instead look where we have something in common and grab it and run, I think we can do it. I really do. I like the comprehensiveness of the post-2020 global biodiversity framework, but to be very, very frank, I like the essential variables approach of the UNCCD framework as well. And why can't we do both? Why can't we agree on a few things at the goal level that gets things moving, and let countries really go after it at the national to local level? And then we stop disagreeing and start agreeing and get the job done. That's all I can say, and I'm sorry for the emotion.
That's okay. Thank you very much. I think we'll let you off the hook, though. But thank you very much for those words of wisdom. And Amy, I think we've got Amy still online. If there are any questions for Amy before we also let Amy get on with her evening, or she might stay with us. So if not, thank you very much, Amy, for your words as well around connectivity and its importance to the agenda. I think what we'll start with then is we're going to now move into a series of presentations. We did see Amy just then again. We're going to first of all hear from Annika Keeley, who is a senior conservation scientist at the Centre for Large Landscape Conservation. And Annika couldn't be with us either. She's also online, and but she's been working very hard on a paper that's been looking at the measures and approaches for addressing connectivity in restoration efforts. So the very things that both Baron and Amy were talking about. So we're about to move into some more sort of practical applications, and then we'll hear from Fernando Spina, who is the CMS COP-appointed Councillor for Connectivity, and then from South Africa on one of their examples and case studies that's been incorporated into that working paper. So are you online, Annika, and are you ready to present?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes, I am here.
And we can hear you, so over to you.
Great. Can I share my screen?
Can she please share her screen? Who has control? Excellent. We can see your slides.
Excellent. In the presentation mode?
Yes.
This big screen? Great. Well, hello everybody. Really sorry I can't be there as well. My name is Annika Keeley, and I'm a senior conservation scientist at the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. And I'm really happy for the opportunity to give you more detail on the working paper on ecological connectivity that Baron just introduced. And I will speak to a few concepts that he already addressed and maybe go into a little bit more depth. And also to say that this paper is coming. It's not published yet, but hopefully it will be a very useful document. So I first want to lay the foundation by really defining in a little bit more detail what we mean when we talk about ecological connectivity. You already heard the definition that Amy presented. And I want to add to that it can be the daily movements to travel among sites that are providing resources such as food, water, and shelter. It can be dispersal movements, which are crucial to maintain genetic diversity within populations, decrease the risk of extinction, and allow species to recolonize suitable habitat areas after local extinction has occurred. So really important there for restoration. It can also be migratory movements, of course, to reach seasonally suitable habitat, both by mammals and by birds. And then the unimpeded flow of natural processes. That may include connecting flows of energy through ecosystems. For example, energy flows provided by wind contribute to the dispersal of pollen and seeds. Energy flows provided by water, we also call that hydrological connectivity, contribute to the transport of matter and organisms. So how is ecological connectivity linked to restoration? And you already heard those phrases. We call it connect to restore and restore to connect. So two answers to that question. First, really considering ecological connectivity maximizes restoration success, because ecological connectivity modifies the distribution, the abundance, the diversity of animals and plants across the landscape. If restoration sites are connected to each other or to natural sites, that will improve the performance and ecological function of the restored habitat. It will improve success. The second way in which connectivity is linked to restoration is that restoration can be an important opportunity to enhance connectivity, so restore to connect. And protected and conserved areas, as well as remaining natural but unprotected areas, are really increasingly isolated from each other due to human activities in the intervening landscape. And in addition, migration routes are threatened or already severed by highways and by development. Targeted restoration to enhance connectivity is an opportunity to restore wildlife movements and ecological processes. And it is really key for maintaining, genetic diversity within populations, decreasing the risk of extinction due to shortages of breeding individuals, allowing animals and plants to colonize suitable habitat, and really, overall, bolstering ecosystem resilience. Both sides of this restoration connectivity relationship come to play in enhancing ecological networks. An ecological network is a system of core habitats connected by ecological corridors, which is established, restored as needed, and maintained to conserve biological diversity in landscapes that have been fragmented. Restoring corridors to connect protected and conserved areas is restoring to connect, and considering ecological connectivity to maximize the success of new restoration projects is connecting to restore. And these ecological corridors may consist partly or entirely of original or restored natural areas managed primarily for connectivity, but they can also cross highly managed areas, such as agricultural areas, as in this picture here from Costa Rica. They can cross rangelands, they can cross commercial forests. As long as they are explicitly managed for connectivity, ecological corridors may include compatible human activities, such as, people can live in there, people can farm in there. It can be forestry, grazing, hunting, fishing, and ecotourism as well. In some parts of the world, large ecological corridors might be managed for the benefit of mobile peoples who need connected systems to maintain traditional livelihoods. But we need to enhance connectivity also beyond ecological networks, like Behren was emphasizing, through sustainable land management and ecosystem restoration. It is vital that in regions where land degradation has led to the loss of soil fertility and the spread of invasive plants, harming the ability of people to farm the land. And in these large landscapes, implementing a single restoration project, managing a single farm sustainably, restoring a single forest patch will have little effect on landscape connectivity, and those projects will suffer from that. But if a farm is converted to sustainable agriculture in concert with other farms in the region, if trees are planted strategically throughout the landscape, if hydrological connectivity is taken into account, the landscape will become more permeable to species movements and the flow of processes, and the land will become healthy and resilient. So the landscape context of restoration sites is a key factor influencing the outcomes of restoration investments. Determining which areas are suitable and a priority for restoration from a connectivity perspective is an important step in landscape restoration planning. Mapping areas within a landscape that are most important for facilitating animal movement or ecological flows is perhaps the most fundamental application of connectivity science. Connectivity maps can help answer a key question in the context of connectivity and restoration. Where are the most important places for connectivity and restoration? Where do we need to prioritize funds for success? And maps can be used by natural resource agencies, by planners, by NGOs and other entities as the basis for designing connected landscapes, determining where proposed developments are likely to impede connectivity, and establishing spatial priorities within landscapes for actions to restore or preserve connectivity. Equally important is really understanding alterations in hydrological connectivity at the watershed scale. It is so important to identify, it is really important to identify suitable restoration sites and restoration approaches. And really hydrological connectivity, understanding it is so important for the success, because if it's not what we expect, those restoration projects will not thrive, they will not succeed. And this is true for all areas of the world, from deserts to tropical rainforests. Many of the pathways identified by connectivity analyses will pass through human-dominated landscapes, where roads and agricultural fields may still hinder movement. And barrier detection analyses can really identify opportunities for restoration. Considerations are really vital for increasing the value and effectiveness of restoration projects. There's so many other criteria, right, that should be considered when planning restoration. And Baron was talking about that. Integrated land use planning considers not only environmental targets, but also sociocultural targets and economic targets, to create a vision of a vibrant, mixed-use landscape that is good for people and for nature. And a really important approach to ensure that connectivity and restoration plans are integrated in planning systems is to involve many stakeholders into the planning process right from the beginning. Developing a common vision increases buy-in and motivates stakeholders to contribute to restoration projects. An example of integrated land use planning and involving stakeholders in the process is happening in Costa Rica. So in 2006, the country began to institutionalize biological corridors as a strategy for the conservation and restoration of biodiversity, with the establishment of the National Biological Corridor Program. Most of the land in the ecological corridors in Costa Rica is privately owned and cultivated. And so the involvement of local communities, of stakeholders, of landowners is essential for integrating land use planning and management to promote connectivity at the landscape level. Participatory platforms called local committees of biological corridors define objectives for the rational use of natural resources in these corridors and serve as a platform for governance. One of these corridors is Corridor Amistosa in the southwest of the country, which links to protected areas and covers an area of over 900 square kilometers. And you can see that landscape in this photo and the map here of the corridor itself. You can see there's forest in there, there's pasture land in there, people live in the corridor, and by improving agricultural and silvicultural practices, diversifying agricultural production, restoring forests, coordinating with institutions to increase sustainable practices. With all these different activities and projects, the communities living and working in the corridor ensure connectivity for wildlife and ecological processes. So just to wrap it up, the working paper will lay out that ecological connectivity needs to be recognized as a key concept for successful restoration. and it explains the international policy context and highlights socio-ecological dimensions of connectivity. It also addresses the fundamental principles underlying restoration interventions and their application to connectivity and shows practical solutions and approaches. And finally, we discuss social and political factors that are essential to achieve restoration efforts involving connectivity. So in a world where nature is disappearing and the climate is changing, we really need tools to help manage nature and conserve biodiversity. And connectivity is nature's own blueprint for taking landscape degradation, neutrality, and restoration solutions to scale. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I'm sorry. Sorry there, I was just listening to your, your presentation and I forgot I was actually facilitating there. Okay, so our next intervention was from Fernando, but I don't think he's online, so if he joins later, we can hear from him then. I am, sorry, just 1 moment. I'm just wondering whether we have in the room a representative from South Africa. Is Miss Flora in the room? Brilliant. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to share our experiences in South Africa regarding connectivity planning. Just to indicate that planning in South Africa is legislated in terms of both the Spatial Land Use Management Act of 2013, but in respect of biodiversity, the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act also mandates the requirements for the National Biodiversity Framework, which is basically a tool that we use to guide the management of biodiversity in the country. And at regional level, it is then mandated by bioregional plans that are then completed by respective regions, municipalities, and cities. To the extent that bioregional plans are concerned, essentially the requirements is for such plans to include measures to protect special type of landscapes, special critical biodiversity areas, and also to look at areas that are highly sensitive, biodiversity sensitive areas also. And therefore, within that context, bioregional plans ensure that there is a degree of connectivity that is maintained within a locality. You would appreciate that in South Africa, we have 16% coverage of land in protected areas. You may know our famous Kruger National Park, which is one of our biggest parks in South Africa. And it stretches all the way from the northeastern seaboard of the country further to the south with the borders with Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and to a degree, the connectivity goes all the way up to the borders with Swaziland. Suffice to say that as a country, we are very ambitious in respect of increasing our protected area coverage, being very much conscious to the global biodiversity target of 30 by 30, and are preparing to make our own contribution towards the achievement of that target of 30 by 30. In this respect, all the critical biodiversity areas are being mapped, including those that are, including sensitive environments, whether it's within privately owned land or publicly owned land or traditionally owned land. We are starting a mapping process to identify those areas and their contribution that they can make to our ambitious to the global target of 30 by 30. And therefore, how this assists us, in South Africa, planning is mandated as a bottom-up approach, just to explain that. And in a sense, therefore, municipalities are required to demonstrate within the special development frameworks the extent to which they have included environment as a structuring element of a spatial frame of a locality. And therefore, bioregional plans is a tool that is specifically used to assist municipalities to be able to allocate or to set aside those pieces of land that then form a spatial framing or a structuring element of a municipality. And this is what we refer to as these bioregional plans. And these bioregional plans, because it's a bottom-up approach, therefore contribute to our overall framing and the management of biodiversity in respect of the National Biodiversity Framework. Just to conclude that at an institutional level, we do have institutional governance mechanisms where we are vertically integrated and horizontally integrated at a government level and also with the other stakeholders outside of the government in order to promote and to advance our biodiversity goal as a country. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for telling us a little bit about the South African situation around connectivity. I'm just going to go back to online and see if Fernando's been able to join us. And if he hasn't joined us, are we able to play his recording of his presentation? We've had a recording made just in case. Okay. We're having a pause. He's clearly not online. Okay, oh, excellent.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone for allowing me to take a few minutes to talk and describe an initiative which is a proposal within the working paper for a joint effort between UNCCD and CMS about the Great Green Wall and connectivity for migratory birds. Every year there are millions and millions of birds which cross the Sahara and then the Mediterranean to move north to breed across huge areas in Europe. Crossing the Sahara is challenging for these birds, and then crossing the Mediterranean as well. These are the so-called ecological barriers for these animals. In order to safely cross the barriers, they have to be able to put up enough reserves in order for them to fuel this extremely prolonged endurance flight. And the barriers, and especially the Sahara, unfortunately, is getting wider for many of these species of birds in the sense that vegetation has been destroyed and soil is being lost. That's why the Great Green Wall of Africa now is a flagship initiative to contrast soil erosion in sub-Saharan Africa. But at the same time, this very important initiative can do much for the benefit of improving the connectivity and ecological connectivity on which so many migratory birds have to rely in order for them to perform their fascinating migrations. Specifically, vegetation which is being replanted and trees which are replanted thanks and through the Great Green Wall of Africa initiative are very important for really huge numbers of birds because they can rest, they can rest in the vegetation. They can also, of course, feed, look for insects, look for nectar in blooming flowers. Everything for them is extremely important as a source of energy to support their endurance flight across the desert. Now, so far, this aspect has not been specifically addressed. And this initiative between UNCCD and CMS is just aiming to monitor and better understand the role of an initiative like the Great Green Wall for such an important component of biodiversity as migratory birds are. So there is a project which has been worked out together. There are already clear ideas for field protocols and how to monitor, study, and better understand how the vegetation which is replanted to prevent further soil erosion across sub-Saharan Africa is used by birds, and how important this is for them, for what species. I think it's extremely important if we succeed in setting up and starting this project, because this will open a completely new perspective also to initiatives like replanting and initiatives to contrast soil erosion in sub-Saharan Africa. So let's work together, UNCCD and CMS, in making use of migratory birds as also indicators of the value of these initiatives and the outcomes of the Great Ring Wall for biodiversity in general and for migratory birds in particular. Thank you.
Great. So you've just heard a recording from Fernando Espina, who is the CMS COP-appointed Councillor for Connectivity. Now, before we move on to the second part of the event, we've got a few more presentations and interventions. We still have Annika on the line, and I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions at this point for Annika. She'd probably be more than happy to answer them. Yes, up the back, please.
Thank you. I have a comment and a question. The comment is, I'm really impressed with the approaches that has been developed when they are talking about participatory restoration connectivity. This is for me something that we have to promote very strongly. And now my question is how, because I saw the case from Costa Rica, that is very encouraging, but how can we duplicate it in Africa, for example, in the Congo Basin, where we have this conflict, strong conflict between men and animals more and more, and we have this, it's like, very little participation of local communities in national parks or protected areas management. So my question is, how can we duplicate these very useful cases that are coming from Costa Rica and other areas into our region? Thank you.
Great, thanks for that question. I'll take one more and then we can go to Annika online, who I'm sure will have the answer. Please.
Hello, it's more a commentary rather than a question. I'm Anne Raymet. I represent the Climate Change Association, which is an association based in Paris. And we are currently working on a demonstration project which is situated in Guinea on precisely ecological connectivity. And I really appreciated Mrs. Keeley's speech, because the project is not developed. It will start by January 2023, but we are currently writing it. And our conclusions are the same as Mrs. Keeley's one, meaning that to have good ecological connectivity, you have to map your territory, and you have to map it very precisely with very precise data, which have to be crossed with what we call a truth point on the ground. You have to associate local populations. It's a very crucial point, because by definition, protected areas are areas where there is population. We are not in national parks, we are in areas where there are populations, so you have to work with them. You have to work on governance, you have to work on legislative process, so it's a very transverse subject. And last but not least, in our project, what we are focusing on is means money. Because once you have your diagnosis, once you know your territory, you have to have money to restore, to protect, to reforest. And what we plan to work on is to, how can I say it in English, to drive climate finance towards biodiversity subjects. So in the end of our project, our objective is to have labelization, like a climate compensation standard, which will connect climate and biodiversity subjects. I don't know if I am clear, but this is basically the scope of our project. And thank you for having developed this workshop, because it's a very important subject.
Great, thank you very much for telling us about your project. I'm sure the people to my right are very excited by it. Annika, are you still online? And did you get the question?
Yes, I'm here. I could hear everything really well, appreciate the other example as well. And really that pointed out how complex of a process this is. And that answers partly the question about how can we actually involve communities who are not interested in the beginning. And I think it is a long process. It's not something that can be done in 2 years or 3 years. It takes a long time. Outreach is really important, explaining to the local population the importance of biodiversity, the importance of connectivity, but also the multi-benefits of connectivity. And I think that's can be very convincing to many people, because it's not just about wildlife, it's about wildlife and people will benefit from landscapes that are connected, because those are healthy, stable landscapes. And so participatory planning involving the communities right from the start, building a vision together after really explaining why it's so important to have high biodiversity, to have connectivity, I think is a very good way to go. And really emphasizing the point, it is not just about wildlife, it's about people too, people's health and people's well-being.
Great, thank you very much for that answer. I hope that was helpful, and maybe you might like to touch base with Wendy before you go, and you can swap contact details and she can follow up with you. We're going to move on to the second part of the program now, where we're going to be looking at connectivity conservation in practice in a broader landscape here. And we're going to start with a presentation from Wendy Elliott, who is the Deputy Leader of Wildlife Practice at WWF International.
Thanks, Claire, and finally a presenter that's in a room with you all. And I'm delighted to be in this room with you all. This is my first UNCCD meeting. And I come from the wildlife sector, a different perspective. And I have to say how inspiring I found the words of Baron at the opening of this session. I do really, I see his vision for how ecological connectivity work strengthens and enhances the work of this convention, and that if we bring these two things together, we can really deliver benefits for biodiversity and people. Could you put the slides up? Yes, great. So I think we've heard a lot from the previous speakers about how these two worlds, bringing them together really brings great benefits. And I wanted to then take that a next step further by talking about an initiative we're developing that really aims to put some of that thinking into practice and accelerate its delivery across the ground. It's called Wildlife Connect. And there's never been more urgency for initiatives on connectivity. This is a common scenario that we're seeing all over the world, remaining patches of natural habitat becoming ever shrinking patches that are isolated from each other. And looking into the future, it becomes even more imperative. As climate change influences habitats around the world, some areas will just become unsuitable for species. So they will need to move into areas that are suitable for them in the future. This is a cool graphic from our friends at TNC that shows that visually, where animals will need to move due to climate change. So, the world goes black. What we've come to recognize, and what you've heard a lot from the other speakers as well, is that no one entity can achieve connectivity conservation alone. It really has to be a joined-up effort. So we joined forces with the Center of Large Landscape Conservation, which is where Annika comes from, and the IUCN WCMC Connectivity Conservation Specialist Group to co-create Wildlife Connect together from the start. I guess we've lost the slides, but I'll carry on. So, and Wildlife Connect really has three main pillars. Firstly, it's about protecting linkages, so not making them protected areas, but stopping their conversion. And that really means kind of getting those areas designated, the science you were talking about, making sure they're then recognized as important, and then preventing their conversion. The second pillar is managed for wildlife flows, and that is really more about how do you manage production lands and other areas that might not be natural habitats but might still allow wildlife to move through them. How can we manage those areas that support both the producers and the wildlife? And then the last is, of course, restoration. In some cases we are just going to need to build that connectivity back where it's been lost. So Wildlife Connect aims to support connectivity all over the globe, but has 4 demonstration landscapes that it's chosen, one in each region, where we're really hoping to scale innovation, try and test new things, and bring diverse collaborators together around new ideas that will really then generate lessons that others can build from. And here we are, there they are. So in Africa, we're focusing on the southern Kenya, northern Tanzania landscape. It's the area of some of the most famous migrations in the world, obviously, with the wildebeest. In Asia, the central India landscape, which is right in the middle of the country, has almost 20% of the world's tigers remaining, but also a huge amount of production. And that's a map actually of tiger permeability through the landscape developed through genetic analysis. And we're working in various corridors to move move cotton farmers to organic farming. So it measures that will ensure those production areas allow tiger movement and also create a value addition for those farmers in the process. So a win-win scenario we're trying to create. In Latin America, it's the Chaco Pantanal landscape, that red circled area in the bottom. That's the jaguar corridor. They call it the jaguar corridor because it's actually possible to connect jaguar habitats all the way from Argentina to Mexico. But those red corridors are the corridors of concern, the ones we're going to lose quickest, and that's what we're going to try and stop happening in the Chaco Pantanal. And last but not least, the Carpathians, Europe's last wilderness, 7 countries, and an incredible forest area where connectivity, restoration, and infrastructure is key. So those are our kind of focal landscapes, but we aim to also influence the global enabling environment for connectivity. So really influencing policies and policies of governments, but also the policies and practices of the market sector and the financial sector to try and streamline and accelerate connectivity on the ground. And we're building on some great successes, and we're really trying to bring those learnings into the work as we go forward. So this is Bhutan not so long ago, but they have recently managed to protect their ecological corridors. So they actually have now a protected network across the whole country, which is fantastic. Pretty unique scenario, but incredible that it can be done. And in the Tariak in Nepal, where communities have restored very degraded land, you can see that was this photo from the 70s on the left, into forest, community-managed forest, in a core corridor between protected areas. And now it's really flourishing. So the women user groups that manage the forests, their well-being has been strengthened, their livelihoods have been strengthened, and tigers and elephants are using that corridor on a regular basis to move between protected areas. And last but not least, the Khaza landscape in southern Africa is probably the largest connected landscape in the world. And this is where, connectivity and land degradation really go hand in hand, because in Khaza, keeping those wildlife dispersal areas open means that wildlife can move away from the areas where there's very high numbers into areas where there's low numbers, and it stops that overpopulation that really degrades the land, particularly when you're talking mega herbivores like elephants. I think one of the other areas that we can benefit from bringing these two worlds together is that there is this really growing momentum in the private sector around biodiversity. So the World Economic Forum has consistently put biodiversity loss in the top 5 global threats to business. And that's now meaning that businesses are taking this seriously, both in the practices and policies that they set, including most recently encouraging that corporate biodiversity offsetting gets focused in connectivity areas, but also practically on the ground. So this is one example that Unilever funded. It recognized it had a lot of biodiversity risk in its oil palm supply chain. So it funded the restoration of a corridor through an oil palm concession in Malaysia. It's that blue line you can see through the concession in yellow that connects those 2 green blocks of forest. And that has enormously reduced the conflict it was experiencing from elephants and orangutans, and really made those populations of species thrive. So this is the thing I think there's an enormous potential to replicate. I think this is my last slide. I just wanted to note, particularly, there was some fantastic science in this convention that was discussed last week, but then there's a lot of emerging science that's quite exciting in the connectivity world as well that I think we can bring in to complement it. Lots of great existing tools already, but these emerging tools like Terradapt that don't just allow us to look at where connectivity is now, but they use AI and detailed remote imaging to actually look at what the future will be. So what does climate change and development scenarios mean the future will be for connectivity, for wildlife and people? And when we know that, we can so much better target our interventions in the right way. But also more participatory tools. This is also using Global Earth Engine, but a tool we developed with the Smithsonian it's a participatory wildlife corridor mapping tool. So it enables anyone to come together in a community and put their thinking and their knowledge together and come up with the mapping in a participatory way. And that is so important because it then creates that common vision for where these important corridors are, which then brings everyone together in the solution of conserving them. So we say this a lot in WWF, together possible, but I think it really is true in this case. We can achieve better land degradation neutrality targets if we focus in connectivity areas for all the reasons you heard Baron and Annika talk about. And wildlife will not survive with degraded lands. So coming together and I think building solutions collectively offers an enormous opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those examples and highlighting those tools. I'm sure there's many people in the audience who will find those quite useful. We have one more presentation, and then we're going to take a couple of interventions from the floor, and then you can ask some questions, because I believe the next presentation we're going to see some camera trapping, if I'm right. So I'd like to ask Miguel to take the floor. Miguel is from El Salvador. He is the Director of Ecosystem and Biodiversity in the Environmental Ministry. So please.
Thank you so much. It's an honor for me to be here representing El Salvador in the Environmental Ministry that has made a big change since the new government with the new vision that is is in town and is of the government of the President Nayib Bukele that I am honored to represent. And well, this trip to the COP has been really revealing. And I'm sure it has been to all of you also. And I want to thank especially Wendy, who is my new friend from today that I just met. And she gave me the opportunity to talk about El Salvador and the things that we're doing there. So El Salvador, can we put the presentation, please? El Salvador is one of the smallest countries in Latin America and the second most populated one. We have more than 400 people for every square kilometers, so definitely we don't have that spare land to do all the, yeah, let's connect here and let's do urban planning here. We have to do everything together. And we were talking here about like how to bring economical, social, and environmental topics together. And they were talking about there are 3 conventions. This one is the one in the middle, money-wise. Why are we not bringing the 3 conventions together is the question that I have in my mind, just so everybody can access the finances that we need. But anyway, maybe we'll answer that in the future. So El Salvador has taken big decisions on how we are going to develop our territorial planning. And thank God we were able to take in account environment, biodiversity, water necessities, economical necessities, and where all the people live. So that is taking those social, economic, and environmental way of thinking. And we decided that we were going to look at our national inventory of forest, and we were going to look what is, for a way of saying, what is worth saving or what is worth focusing on. And we definitely found something interesting. We found the nodes of where is this mass of forests, and we saw all the other land uses that we have: agronomics, agroforestry, intensive agronomics, urban places, touristic places that are based on ecological capital. And we decided, okay, so this is our body. If you can see that map, that's a body, like a human body. And the nodes are the organs, like your heart, your liver, your stomach, your brain, your eyes, your mouth. How do these organs live? Well, they live because they are connected. And through what they are connected? Well, they are connected through corridors that I want to think of them as veins or the nervous system, right? So all this oxygen and nutrients are coming to these nodes or organs, and it's keeping them alive. So we're going to plan on keeping a healthy body, we said. We need to take care of our circulation system. And what is that circulation system? Well, in the law, it says in El Salvador that the riversides are of the state. So the law is the main thing that needs to happen, I think, in order for anything to be enforced. So we said, okay, let's find those nodes, let's find that forest, and let's connect them together. Yeah, but the people who have maize don't want to do agroforestry, or the people who have this don't want to change their crops. So let's do it in our land, we said as a government. And we decided, okay, let's start by using the rivers. So we modeled with our inventory, we looked at where are these nodes and the borders that we need to have around them, and we decided to do the territorial planning. As you can see in the map on the left, those are the main forest masses, and the lighter green lines are these rivers that are all across, and you can see how they all connect. So if we can preserve all these rivers, we can preserve our circulation system, and we are attacking 2 problems at the same time. This is connectivity and water necessity. That El Salvador, it's one of its biggest problems also. Not because we don't have water, because we have 2,000 millimeters a year, and that's a lot of water, but we have it like in 2 months, and we don't have where to store it. So we need to keep it in our rivers and in our wetlands, right? So this, I think it's our game changer, because our territorial planning is from the Minister of Environment, is the one who says what you can do and where. And we are consulting all this with the local populations, local communities, and local municipalities and governments. And what we're trying to do is to give an environmental proposal that they validate locally and that they appreciate that the environmental capital that they have locally is the only capital that they have for the future. So it's been taken well from other people. This is an example for how the constructions from now on have to take into account that they cannot cut down the corridors. If they're going to build up a street or a road, they're going to have to make a corridor. And we have a joke that comes from this, and that it says, why did the chicken cross the road? Well, because it has a corridor to cross over. So this is just a way of us saying thank you, and we want to be able to exchange information with everybody and to let you know that we are a small country with big aspirations. And I'm going to show you how we are valuing like the status of the place. We have conservation programs focused on critical species, and with trail cameras that we have, and this is what we have. In 20 years, it's the first time that El Salvador has been able to register the presence of a big cat like a puma in, it's not a protected area. We only have 100-hectare protected area there, and it's a forest of 800 hectares. So you were talking, how will I incentivize the private sector to protect their own forest? I think with evidence like this, you will be able to, and we will be able to get the funding we need to convert this into the future of our generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you win to have with the best graphics on your slides yet. Not that I'm biased, a bit of camera trapping there. I've now got on my list 2 more interventions from the floor. And the first one is from Nepal. May, are you going to intervene? Is he in here? He is here, isn't he? Nepal?
Yeah.
Yeah? Excellent, please. Sorry, I was looking in the wrong direction.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, most of the people in the room may know where Nepal is. If you don't know, let me share briefly the location. We are in between 2 big countries, China and India, and we are a very small country. Though we are very small, and our geography is very different. In lowland area, there is plate areas, which is only 70% of our country, and rest of the areas is hilly. And within this 70% area, which is one of the most populated area as well, within this 17% area, we have 5 protected areas, and rest of the areas are productive landscape. And within this area, within this 17% areas, we have applied these concepts. We have approved by our national policy that to implement this landscape, Tarai Arc landscape project is implementing in that area. So you can understand that the protected area is there, and the population density is side by side equally very dense in that areas. So I would like to share something about this approach that we are following in our country. First of all, I would like to share with you that we, in our constitutions, we formulated in our constitution just I think in 72, means 8 years before. And at that time, in our constitution, we have mentioned this ecosystem approach and landscape approach in our constitutions. So that by that means, now we are very easier positions to implement such kind of activities. And even in this allocation of rights and responsibility within our constitutional annexes, we have clearly mentioned the provision of these things to be implemented by the local level government as well. And in our national level policies and plans, especially the forest policy has recognized these landscape level concepts and corridor and connectivity to be maintained while conserving these things. So that these are some of the policy and legal provisions that have facilitated for us to go for these activities. Though there are so many compromise and sacrifice by the peoples to implement such kind of activities, because it looks a difficult one. But with our 10 to almost 14 years experience, we have our 14 years of experience for this connectivity and landscape level approach, and right now we are in a very good position that it has been politically it has been recognized, and the people have a good understanding about what is actually the connectivity and corridor-like things and its importance for conservation of biodiversity. And while discussing these things, I want to share with you that in our policy, or while following these approaches, we have conservation education at all levels. These are the three fundamental things that we are considering. And community development programs we are running on that areas side by side. And with this approach, I want to say with very proud that by 2005, we are in a position, so by 2022, we have to double the population of tigers, and it is going on in our country right now, and within 2-3 weeks we will be in a position that, and I would very proudly like to share with you that one of the most indicative species, tigers, it is almost double in our country. We are success for maintaining these populations. Side by side, for rhinoceros, another big species, in 1970s, we have almost lost our populations. It was below 100, and we are saying that our population is going not viable, is going destroyed in that time. And right now, we have secured a very viable population, and with our translocation-like things, we have maintained it 3 viable population in our country. So that these are the another reports that have been made success with these things. And side by side, we are very serious while considering these activities to think about the safety and welfare of the other large mammals as well, because sometimes it is very difficult, because if we focus on species level conservations and species level conservations with flagship species, we consider that with these flagship species the ecosystem is managed well, but sometimes consideration with the other species is equally important. That's why we have given emphasis for other species as well, and we are sincere for managing those species at the same times. And to get while doing such kind of things, there are some challenges as well. Most of the challenge that participants has raised during their question and session is that it is equally viable, that the consensus of the political and social communities is very important. Otherwise, it cannot be achieved. Because politically, in local level, if people are not conscious about these things, the importance of biodiversity and how can we compromise these things, that the productive landscapes, how can a productive landscapes can be used for wildlife? It is a big question, so that productive landscapes actually is not compromised to use for biodiversity or for these mega species, but we have to make some sorts of arrangement within the communities that they can compromise with the wildlife. So the living together with wildlife is the basic concept. We are giving these slogans throughout the country. How can we live along with the wildlife? And with these practices, we have got some successes in that areas. For doing this, for designing, again, some questions raised about the designing of these activities. How can we design these activities? How experts can help in our case? But specifically in Nepal's case, I really appreciate the approach that we followed in our forestry practices. That is the community forestry practices that we that is very helpful for maintaining these activities. And side by side, we have the private forestry activities. And while designing these private forestry activities, we have given emphasis for the stepping stones like things, the small stepping stones, 2 or 5 hectares patches, and some sorts of infrastructure, the green infrastructure along the canals and other structures are also beneficial for these things. Side by side, the continuous monitoring and census of mega and corridor species is very important, because we are doing it very frequently, how animals are moving, how the population, what sorts of population trend is going on, and we are getting such kind of information. And frequently, each 5 years, we are doing this rhino census, and tiger as well as we are monitoring in every 5 years. So with this information, we are getting information exactly how the animals are spreading, what sorts of movement are there, and what are the prime areas that we are suffering from. So these are the few initiatives that we are taking in our case, though they look some sorts of very technically very scientific, but I think in our practice we don't have so much scientific application. But this monitoring and working with the local communities is the best success that we have achieved till now. And side by side, another thing is that while designing or doing such kind of things, we have to be very cautious on restoration-like things, because there is also some sorts of compromise from people's sides. We talk about restoration and if we plant alien species, the most productive species, then that may not work. The community people should emphasize or give priority for the biodiversity and the resources what they were using since very past. In that way, if they practice such kind of things and maintain such kind of things, then we can maintain our ecosystem restoration, not only the restoration of the patches of forest, but the restoration of ecosystem should be in place, otherwise it may not work. And it not only may not work, sometimes it may create some sorts of conflict between people and the wildlife, because when they do not get adequate habitat, their ecosystems that they desire, and they come out to the villages, and it may destroy the local communities. And till now, we did some sorts of things in our Tarai Arc landscape. We also have another landscapes in the mountain area, that is the sacred Himalayan landscapes. We are also getting some sorts of support from the local communities. But still, in our case, we have to do a lot in case of elephant corridor, because still we are facing too many problems with elephants and their habitat management, and how can we work with the local communities in case of elephant, because there is a very narrow belt. The habitat that we have restored, sometimes they are the good habitat for the elephants, but when coming from across one habitat to another habitat types, they are often reached to the villages. That's why there is the problems in our case, and for elephants we are still facing some sorts of problems, and there is still conflict with local communities with elephants. And another one is that is the vertical corridor. We are talking more about east-west corridor in our context, the vertical corridor that are more linked with the watershed related things that are along the major rivers, along with major rivers. In that case, we haven't practiced a lot. We have already designed some these things. How can we proceed in that areas? We still have 3 more corridors to work out, but not implemented so effectively. We have to go for this corridor as well. And all these kind of works, we are always together with WWF, IUCNs are with us. We are working together. We have a very good collaboration in technical supports from those institutions. I also appreciate the cooperations from these institutions. And if any questions regarding Nepal, I welcome from other participants, because I think we have applied this approach, and at least in this position we are satisfied. It may bring some issues and problems in later on, because maintaining once you restore is okay, but maintaining the restore sites is a big challenge. You have to maintain it for a long period. Thank you. Thank you for this.
Thank you very much for that intervention. Okay, we have one more intervention on my list, and it's going to be, I believe, in French from Gabon, and we'll have a translation as we're going along or afterwards. So over to you, please.
Merci. Je suis Nikaz Moulombi du Gabon. Alors, les questions de connectivité créent la plus grande pauvreté avec la défense des populations à chasser. Ça crée les conflits hommes-faune, l'exode rural, et avec l'absence d'implication des populations dans les comités de gestion des aires protégées et l'absence des comités de parcs aussi, ce sont les problèmes.
So the issue of connectivity in Gabon is related to poverty in rural areas and to human-wildlife conflict. It is related also to the rural exodus and to the lack of engagement of local population in the management of protected area and in the lack of management in the committee of the parks.
Okay. Sur le plan de la gouvernance, on peut aussi noter l'absence de financement pour les organisations nationales et locales, un faible engagement des femmes dans la conservation et l'absence de capacité des acteurs locaux sur les questions des droits des populations et de la gestion durable des forêts. Et il y a l'absence des observatoires indépendants des forêts autour des parcs, la gestion des parcs. Et pour ça, il y a aussi la non-implication des communautés dans ce cadre.
On the governance, another issue is the lack of the resources for the civil society and the lack of capacity for the local actor on the right of the population in managing the park, the lack of independent observatory for the forest management, and the lack finally related to the lack of engagement in general of the local population.
Comme solution proposée, il y a le tourisme communautaire. Il y a le tourisme communautaire comme solution proposée. Il y a les activités génératrices de revenus pour les femmes comme solution proposée. Et le Gabon a 11 millions a préservé 11 millions d'hectares de forêt avec 12 parcs nationaux. Et le Gabon réalise aujourd'hui, en termes de carbone positif, près de 140 millions de tonnes par an.
So the solution is linked to the support to community tourism, but also to women's economic revenue and to biodiversity conservation. In Gabon, there are 11 million hectares of protected areas in 12 national parks, which is equivalent to 140 million tonnes net positive carbon.
Et donc le Gabon est un grand pays de zones de biodiversité, avec une grande conservation des zones de grands singes, avec le parc de Minkebe, avec le parc de Mayumba, et donc il y a une grande biodiversité avec le parc de la Loupé. Et le Gabon a aussi un centre de recherche sur la biodiversité, et donc cette biodiversité, les effets positifs de cette conservation, c'est l'augmentation de la biodiversité, où on trouve donc les singes, les éléphants et les panthères qui sont en train d'augmenter aujourd'hui au Gabon, ce qui pose donc aussi une grande pauvreté.
So there are three parts in Gabon, the Lope, Mukembe, and Mayumba, that are interconnected across three countries, Cameroon, Gabon, and Congo. And these are home of big forest area, but also of big monkey, big panthers, and big elephants. And this has led to an increased conflict between human and wildlife, and also to increase poverty. No.
Yeah. Et il y a donc de cette augmentation des populations des éléphants. Et comme bénéfice, il y a une augmentation des populations des éléphants, il y a une augmentation de la biodiversité qui permet donc de faire aussi du prélèvement pour la médecine traditionnelle. Et la question donc du conflit homme-faune devient un grand problème. Et donc une solution à ces problèmes passe par un programme pour concilier le social, l'humain et la nécessité de conservation dans le respect des droits humains.
So the increased biodiversity has allowed the local population to have increased access to traditional medicines, and despite the conflict with wildlife, the poverty has decreased, and the solution to all this new situation is to make sure that the new program considered both the needs of the human population but also of the animal, and that everything is done in respect of human rights. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you so much for that intervention, and thank you so much for the translation as well. Much appreciated. So we've just had a number of different case studies from all the different parts of the world there, very rich. We're almost out of time, but is there any last questions people might have for any of the people who just spoke, or anyone who might still be online, for all I know? I can only see myself now. Yes, please. And you'll have to translate as well.
Merci pour ce side event, c'est important. Mais j'ai une question, c'est bien ce que WWF est en train de réaliser, mais comment WWF fait pour aider les communautés francophones au moment où la COP 15 se passe à Abidjan, met beaucoup d'argent pour la conservation, mais ne met pas l'argent pour la traduction, pour permettre à ceux qui sont là de mieux s'approprier cette question. Comment WWF va faire pour les prochains sommets? Merci.
On va le faire la prochaine fois. C'est promis. Désolé.
No, John has to répondre.
Bon, je vais répondre en français pour tous les francophones qui sont dans la salle. C'est de dire tout simplement qu'il y a eu beaucoup de bousculades dans l'organisation du side event, ce qui n'a pas permis que le dispositif de traduction se mette en place comme il se doit. Et naturellement, ce n'est pas une façon de négliger la partie francophone que de tenir le side event complètement en anglais. C'est de dire, dans les prochaines occasions, les prochaines opportunités, on prendra toutes les mesures pour que les deux langues puissent être concomitamment au service de tous pour une bonne compréhension des différentes présentations. Merci.
Okay, I think we have someone down the front here. Yes, please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I have to come back again on the answer who has been given. I'm from Cameroon, and in Cameroon we are bilingual. And I've been participating in many UN meetings, even at the headquarters in New York. It always has been like this. We are saying in the United Nations, I myself, I've been a UN staff, a former UN staff. And they always say there are 5 official languages within the UN, but always you have English coming at first. Even at the headquarters, they say documents are going to be translated as soon as possible, but it's hardly happened. And we always have documents in English, hardly in French. It's not fair, and the question he has been raising is a very important one. A very much important. It has to be taken into consideration. Thanks a lot. So the answer given there is just like a sort of excuse for this session, and I can understand, but it has always been like that, whether this session or the previous one. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. The language issue is noted, and we can always convey that back to the Secretariat as well. Are there any other technical questions? Because if not, we can thank our speakers once more and we can close for the night. Okay, so thank you. And thank you very much for those online. And if our CMS colleagues are there, if you could please thank Fernando too for his recording and his participation. So thank you very much and good night.